Afternoon here. Myself, Connor Riley, Mike Griffith. I believe Brandon Adams is going to be joining us here shortly. But the big news of the afternoon, A.D. Mitchell entering the transfer portal. It is not exactly a surprise. I think this has been rumored for the last little bit. And here we will bring in another guest, Brandon Adams here joining us to talk the latest with A.D. Mitchell entering the transfer portal, 2 seasons at Georgia. A lot of this past season, he was injured. I believe he only played 5 games this year, missed a lot of time with a high ankle sprain that really seemed to linger. But at the end of the season, when Georgia needed him the most, he came up big, had the game-winning touchdown catch against Ohio State, had another touchdown in the national championship game. In 4 college football playoff games, A.D. Mitchell has 4 touchdown catches. I think he is probably the most athletically gifted wide receiver that Georgia has in the wide receiver room. But from a personnel loss standpoint, Georgia's already played a lot of the season without A.D. Mitchell. And when you factor in that they get Ladd McConkey back last night, I think you feel a lot better about the direction of this wide receiver room, especially given they've already added 2 players out of the transfer portal in Ra Thomas and in Dominic Lovett there as well. So second straight year, Georgia loses an established wide receiver to the transfer portal, Jermaine Burton doing so last year. But I think you saw this year, even with all the injuries in the wide receiver room, Georgia was at a spot where they were able to weather the storm there.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Connor. This is a cost of doing business. I think that's exactly. Georgia got a couple of really, really talented guys out of the transfer portal, and I think this is a byproduct of it. I mean, those guys were brought in to catch passes, and when Ladd McConkey made his announcement, I think that kind of cemented it. Brandon, I know you've been on top of this as well. What are your thoughts, reactions?
It reminds you of the way that professional sports fans have been forced to become over the course of the last however many years. I mean, A.D. Mitchell's legacy at Georgia cemented. As Connor mentioned, some of the greatest catches in this program history have been made by Mitchell. Now he's gone. It's almost like if you're an Atlanta Braves fan, Jorge Soler hits a great home run in a World Series, kind of a short-term player in Atlanta on to somewhere else after that. There's an element of this with guys like Mitchell, where in this new NIL transfer portal age in which we live in, you're here today, you make the contribution. I think if you're a Georgia fan, I think the right feeling here is to be grateful for what he did. You may not love the way that he left, but there's no denying the impact that he made on Georgia while he was here.
Yeah, I think BA is right. This is just sort of, unfortunately, the cost of doing business in college sports nowadays. I'm not going to be surprised when we hear that A.D. Mitchell got a bag, so to speak, and goes and gets paid a lot of money to go play for another school. And you can be mad at the player for that. I get that. But at the same point in time, and this point has been made before, if somebody comes in and offers you 2 times what you're making, you're going to consider hard leaving that job. And so while, yes, A.D. Mitchell played a very valuable part in what Georgia has been able to do over the last 2 seasons, this is just sort of the reality of the system that has been created or allowed to be created by the NCAA. Their refusal to put in guardrails to this NIL system and really enforce any sort of tampering. I mean, again, this is the last day of the transfer portal that the window is open, and he's probably already got a place lined up where he's going to go and enroll and start contributing right away. That doesn't happen without some serious back channeling there. So resetting the news, A.D. Mitchell enters the transfer portal, another sort of lost the wide receiver position for Georgia. A talented player, but a guy who had missed a lot of this season. Georgia already sort of knows what life is like without A.D. Mitchell, missing, I believe, 9 games. He essentially only played 5 snaps from the end of the Oregon game to the start of the LSU game there for Georgia this season. So from an on-field football perspective, they already sort of know what life is like without him. He is the 3rd wide receiver Georgia has lost this offseason. Kearis Jackson enters the NFL draft. Dominic Blaylock currently in the transfer portal there as well. And I think the big thing with this wide receiver room, it makes the return of Ladd McConkey all that much more important for Georgia, because with what he's able to do, the versatility that he's able to play with, you add in guys like Dominic Lovett and you add in a guy like Ra Thomas as well, who can, I think, do the things on the outside that Mitchell was partially able to do. It allows McConkey to thrive more out of the slot. I also think this is a massive offseason for Arian Smith, a guy who we saw make really big plays and really big strides in that game against Ohio State. And I think if he's able to stay healthy this whole offseason and really ingratiate himself into this offense in a way he just has not been able to consistently do so, I do think he's got a really high ceiling for what he's going to be able to bring to this offense this season.
Well, I think you're right about that. And I'd also add to this what I said on DawgNation Daily today, which is, Georgia's a program that found A.D. Mitchell when few maybe knew who he was. has seemingly developed him to get him to the point where he's been healthy. He's been a very, effective contributor. And now essentially he's sort of had Mitchell maybe stolen from them. If you had to have your choice of, I can either be the team that can steal the player or the team that can find and develop the player, you would much rather be the team that can develop players because that is a more renewable resource. I don't care what program it is. Eventually the money just sort of runs out, or the money is a finite resource where the ability to have the tenacity and the intelligence or whatever else to go out and find players, develop players, and keep that pipeline coming into the program, that's the kind of resource that just has a much, I guess, better opportunity to be renewable over the course of the long haul. So listen, I understand Georgia fans' feeling on this. It stinks to lose A.D. Mitchell. I'm a Georgia fan. It feels that way to me. But the machine that finds a Mitchell when no one else knew who he was, the machine that develops guys like Mitchell to the tune of 65-7 in a national championship, then NIL war chest at so-and-so university. And I do truly believe that.
Well, I agree with you, Brandon, but at the same time, Georgia went and took Missouri's best receiver and Mississippi State's best receiver. So, this is the game now. Yes, Georgia develops and brings the guys in, but they also take guys and pay guys from other places too. So, as Connor said, cost of doing business, and something you saw this coming. I think we've heard this rumored for a long time that Texas was involved with A.D. Mitchell, talking with players and people close to the team. I don't think this is a surprise at all. I think that, Georgia moves forward without guys all the time. And I think, Jermaine Burton is probably a really good example of that. I mean, Jermaine was a guy that, was certainly impactful with 197 yards in one game. And he was being looked at as one of the main targets returning and felt the grass was greener for him for whatever reason. And, there are dynamics that go beyond football. Certainly with A.D. Mitchell, there's, talk about family and reasons outside of football where he may want to be back in Texas. Certainly getting a bag or money. This is the part of the game that we don't like. I remember, we've had spirited discussions about it on past Cover 4 shows. Nobody likes the free agency angle of this. But it's a reality. And it's not just going out and getting – like the Missouri receiver or the Mississippi State receiver, or Texas getting a Georgia receiver, if that's where Mitchell ends up. It's also paying to retain players that may be getting offers from other schools. And when you're Georgia, to Brandon's point, they do such an incredible job developing players that, yes, other schools are going to be interested. It used to be you just worried about, well, the assistant coaches might move on. Well, now it's the players. Right. And certainly recruits, when they were commitments, you'd see other teams kind of swoop in and get them. So there's a lot of dynamics involved here. I know that fans that love AD and the big plays that he made are going to miss him. But for Kirby Smart, and Connor was sitting in the room, and I think you talked about it at the time, Brandon. Look, if you don't want to be a dog, move on. Because there's a long line of guys that want to be a part of this program and that are capable of filling those shoes. I mean, A.D. Mitchell is a great receiver, but so is George Pickens, and Georgia managed to win a national win with George and win without him, and they'll win with or without A.D. Mitchell.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately. Go ahead, BM.
I was just going to ask you a question before I joined on here. How good do you think A.D. Mitchell is?
I think I think he's got the potential if he develops into being an NFL draft pick, and depending on what he'll ultimately run at the combine. I think with what you've seen from his athleticism on field, he could potentially be a first-round draft pick, but he's got to be able to get on the field to do that, and he just was not able to. And there was some frustration, I think, this year with the way that ankle injury sort of was developed and handled, and I don't think that Georgia, when he first went down with that injury, expected him to be out as long as he was. I think you've seen his ability, his running ability, his leaping ability, his ability to make big plays in big games is certainly something that I think appeases and tracks to the NFL level. But I'll say this here as well. Ladd McConkey's an NFL wide receiver. He was going to be drafted this year if he had entered the NFL draft with everything that he does and brings to the table. And so I think we're going to start to see this idea that, for a long time that Georgia doesn't use its wide receivers, that Georgia doesn't develop wide receivers. I just don't think that's true anymore. You've seen it with George Pickens and what he was able to come in and do year one for Pittsburgh. I think Ladd McConkey is going to do that. And next year's Georgia passing offense, I still expect to be razor sharp, even with Stetson Bennett moving on, even with A.D. Mitchell moving on. And it's going to look a little different because they won't have Darnell Washington back, and he played a huge role in the way this offense was sort of run. Well, Oscar Delp is going to step into those shoes. He's not the same level of blocker, so the offense, I think, as a whole is going to look a little different there. But with the talent that they have coming back, Arian Smith, Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers, I'm not saying both Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett are going to hit, but I'd be surprised if both of them don't end up being contributors. I do think at least one of them will be a valuable player for Georgia in that aspect next season. And so, losing A.D. Mitchell stings. But again, there are far fewer questions I have about this wide receiver room this season than I did last year when Georgia lost Jermaine Burton. And I think it speaks to the job that Brian McClendon has come in and put his stamp on this wide receiver room. I know BA and I'm not sure if Mike, you did get a chance to talk to him during the 2 media days, but I came away so impressed with what he has done and speaking with him and what comes next for this Georgia wide receiver room. And he's no doubt already put a stamp on this wide receiver position, and I expect that to be even stronger going forward.
Well, Mike, to Connor's point, I talked about this in DawgNation Daily today there as well. If you look at Ladd McConkey's year this year, he essentially had just as good as, if not a better year than George Pickens had in 2019, which at the time we thought for what a receiver could do, kind of in the Kirby Smart system, so to speak. And yet McConkey this year matched that to a certain extent, kind of exceeded that, at least in terms of the overall receiving yards. And Ladd was just really one of the guys in the offense. So I do think all of this is very much easy, fan, because as you and I said today, it is back-to-back national champs. So whoever plays in this offense seems to succeed in this offense. And so therefore the idea that Mitchell or anybody else is sort of a can't do without them type of player, I just think the evidence on the field would suggest otherwise.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And listen, I don't think anybody is irreplaceable. I think we've all seen that in our own careers, and we've seen it on different teams and franchises. But if I'm a Georgia person, the one guy I'm holding my breath for is Todd Monken, with all the NFL coordinator openings and head coach, because Monken is the guy that schemes it all together. Now, that said, Mike Bobo and Brian McClendon both have offensive coordinator experience. So I think as long as and they're familiar with the offense, that's the other good thing. It's not like Kirby would have to run out there and grab somebody and plug them in. But I say that because all the players are pieces of something greater, regardless of the position. And Kirby has built a program that can sustain and win with different players. We've seen Georgia win with different quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, offensive linemen. So many great players have come and gone in just the last 7 years. And yet this is now a program that can sustain and a coaching staff that works so well together. It may change the puzzle a little bit. It's one less piece. Things may look a little bit differently. I think about this year's offensive passing numbers, and it was largely a byproduct. Monken finally came out and said this. I don't remember which one of the media opportunities it was, guys, but he basically said they had to throw the ball more because they were down to 3 scholarship running backs. When Kendall Milton got injured, that offense had to change. They were not going to feed Kenny McIntosh 15 to 20 carries a game in the first month of the season. So we saw them rely more heavily on their receivers and their tight ends. And Kirby would say, look, those are passes to y'all in the stats, but we consider them runs, long handoffs, quick passes, quick screens. Now, that was then and this is now. You've gone out there and got this burner from Missouri and Ra Thomas, and you mentioned Ladd McConkey, and he's got great speed, and Arian Smith. How exciting was it to see Arian Smith go from a guy being 3 catches all season to then have 3 for 129. I don't know if you beat Ohio State without Arian Smith. Yet another example of the depth and talent that Georgia football has, and to Connor's point. And I talked with Arian after the game in the locker room, and I can't help but laugh because he said, I don't want to say too much, but we might be even better next year. And I was like, well, that's saying a lot. Let's roll with it. So you see where the mindset and the excitement is in the receiver room. So, yeah, A.D. Mitchell, thanks for the game-winning catch in the national title. Thanks for the game-winning catch. but now he's gone and somebody else will be ready to fill those shoes. And Todd Monken will take a look at these pieces when all the shuffling is done. Thankfully, today's the last day of the portal, right? When all the shuffling is done, he's going to put this up. Connor says, wait a minute, Connor, what's on your mind there?
Yeah, Mike, I have bad news for you. If you're sick and tired of the portal stuff, there's another window that's going to be open from May 1st to May 15th. And my understanding from talking to people in this industry, I think that portal window is going to be even more wild in terms of what you see in terms of guys moving, in terms of guys making decisions post spring. So, well, the transfer portal window does close for today.
Although the post spring,
yeah, go ahead and say it.
Sorry to cut you off, but the post spring portal last year was actually, I think, a little quieter than some people thought it was going to be. But maybe won't be the case because people are just a bit more used to that. I think there were a lot of coaches last spring who were disappointed there weren't more high-level names in that portal, but that may not be the case this time around.
Right, and I do think that this year, because there is a set window from May 1st through May 15th, I think maybe you do potentially see a little bit more action there. BA, you being the requisite Georgia fan, I'm going to ask you to put on your Georgia fan cap here, and I need you to be honest with me. How do you really feel about this? How do you really feel about A.D. Mitchell, a guy who, we were talking about it yesterday with a couple of buddies. His touchdown catch over Kyrie Jackson in the national championship game, arguably maybe the greatest catch in program history. Maybe only Lindsey Scott's touchdown against Florida is the only thing that you can really put in that category. How do you feel about a player that has done that has contributed for 2 years here, ultimately packing up and electing to play elsewhere?
Honestly, I'm not that mad at Mitchell, and I hope my connection's okay on this. I'm kind of getting a little bit of a wavering connection. I'm not that mad at Mitchell. This is the thing that's available to him. I've made my peace with NIL. I've made my peace with transfer portal. I don't like tampering. And if that makes me sound like the old man on the porch, I don't care. I don't like tampering. It's the one thing I had any power to. I would enforce tampering rules. I think it's weird that professional sports do. So that's the one complaint I have. As far as how I feel about A.D. Mitchell, honestly, he gave me a big catch last January. He gave me a huge catch against Ohio State. Somewhere else and get paid. I'm not saying I wish him well because I don't necessarily wish him well. It's hard to penetrate my happiness right now, at least in terms of what's happening on the field for Georgia, because they've won back-to-back national championships. If that didn't happen, would I be pounding my fist on the table right now? Yeah, I probably would. But am I going to be beside myself in anger given what's happened on the field for Georgia the last couple of years? I probably wouldn't. My anger, or I should say, it'd be a very different feeling. My anger is reserved for the fact that I don't like tampering. It seems pretty obvious that's what's happened here. Did Georgia tamper with somebody else? Maybe they did. Is it hypocritical? I don't really care. But the tampering part is what I don't like. Ultimately, with Mitchell, he made some big catches. I'm certainly not going to trash him. I'm not going to act like I love the situation. It just sort of is what it is, but they win during the season. That's probably enough for me.
And I'll say this here. Last offseason, they lose Jermaine Burton. I think there was a lot more vitriol around that, especially because of the fact that he went to Alabama. Do you know who had a better season this year statistically, Jermaine Burton or Ladd McConkey? It was Ladd. BA, you sort of touched on this earlier. Ladd set the Georgia program record under Kirby Smart this season for most receiving yards in a season, surpassing what George Pickens did in 2019 there. And look, this Georgia offense, I'm going to be really interested to see how this quarterback battle plays out. I think Carson Beck is probably the favorite going into it right now. But, again, and Mike, I know you've written a ton about this. We'll have a ton more about this all offseason. I think the direction that they go with this quarterback battle and quarterback position is going to say a lot about what they view with this offense because, Carson is a very good player. I think he has the best arm right now of the three guys in that room, but he is not the mobile threat that Stetson Bennett was. And we know mobility played a factor in Georgia riding with Stetson Bennett over JT Daniels. And I'm going to be interested in seeing how much mobility sort of factors into this offense because I do believe, Carson Beck can sit back there and pick you apart, but there are some questions now about this offensive line going forward in terms of what you have back there with Warren McClendon and Broderick Jones moving on. And we're still obviously waiting for Cedric Van Pran's decision there as well. It's going to be a new look offensive line. And while the schedule, especially early next year, is cupcake soft, I do think that the way this offensive line plays and the way this offensive line goes is going to play a role in how the quarterback position shakes out. But if it is Carson Beck, I expect them to throw the ball a lot, maybe even more than they did this season, even given some of the injuries you've seen at the running back position, just because of the skill set that he fits with and he works with. Again, the throws that and again, it was Vanderbilt. It was a blowout. I get it. The throws that he made in that game against Vanderbilt were very impressive. And while he won't have A.D. Mitchell with him next year, neither will Brock Vandagriff or Gunnar Stockton, I'm very interested in seeing how this wide receiver room, which I still believe is a net positive, helps this quarterback room going forward.
Mike?
Well, I would agree with that. And I don't know to what you just said about Kirby and, Bennett, the runner, and JT, the thrower. And is it kind of chicken egg? Is it quarterback? Let's figure out the personnel, or is it let's see what our personnel is and then let's go with quarterback? I mean, the additions of those wide receivers, and again, I can't tell you how explosive this receiver from Missouri is. I think this is a dynamic addition. If Georgia goes 3 or 4 wide, and remember, that was, I don't want to say plan A, but it kind of was, right? Monken's handpicked guy out of the portal was JT Daniels. And what we saw him try to do was go air raid concept with multiple receivers. But then Georgia had so many receivers get hurt. I'll never forget Kirby saying, and Connor, I think you were there, it's hard to go 4 and 5 wide when you've only got 6 or 7 healthy receivers. Now, I don't know about the depth and if Georgia has enough receivers to go 4 and 5 wide or 4 wide in their base formation. And you talk about Oscar Delp. We look at the talent they're recruiting at the tight end position. I think they found something here. Now, not everybody's going to be Brock Bowers. I mean, Brock superpowers Bowers. Not everybody is going to be that Superman. I mean, Delp looked awful good, but I don't know, as Connor said, if Delp fits the profile that Darnell did. I mean, who does? 6'7", 280 and can, block any defensive lineman. So it's going to look different. How many multi-receiver sets are we going to see? And I think to Connor's point, that's kind of a determining factor. If you feel good enough that you have a deep enough core, and I don't know if that's Monken's plan A or plan B. And also Kirby's going to decide defensively, how much offense do you need? The complementary football, right? How exciting, how many spices do you really need in the soup? Because if that defense is locked down, and Brandon sat next to me frustrated for games, him and I have both switched roles on this, of how much running we're comfortable with. If you got a great defense, you're playing field position football and punting it away. But if you think you got to score a lot of points, and Jake, look at Jake Fromm, right? Jake was the most boring, predictable guy until they played Alabama. And holy cow, now all of a sudden Jake's throwing it 30 times because you had to. What is Georgia going to have to do? These are all the things that factor into this decision, in addition to the intangibles. For all we're talking about, I think Monken and Kirby, they're going to see how much Carson has matured. What is his leadership like? Where is Brock Vandagriff at? He's committed and told us he's going to graduate in the fall. That means he's going to be here next season. We all thought, well, somebody's got to leave. Well, not according to Vandagriff. He's going to graduate in the fall. So you got him through December at least, even if he's not. And what about Gunnar Stockton? He stood in front of me. I said, this ain't the little guy that I thought this ain't Stetson Bennett. This dude's big. This dude can truck some people. And he just smiled so much. It's like he knows something that we don't. So I think this competition is very, very real. I think the mobility, as Connor said, is going to be important. I think the leadership and the work ethic and what these guys show Kirby and Monken this offseason. And to Brandon's point, Connor, I agree with you that the post-spring transfer portal will be live. But I think by then, Georgia's going to have this thing on a rail, and the guys that know they're plugged in are going to stick around, and the undesirables are going to be the ones that move on.
BA, I'll let you jump in here.
Two quick things for me. I'm going to cite something that Jim Moore Jr. once said years ago, which I totally believe. No team that uses a 4 wide receiver set as its base offense ever won a national championship. I don't believe they ever will. Tight ends are really important at Georgia, but they're still really important in college football in general in terms of that 4th receiving target being a tight end. So tight ends are still going to matter at Georgia. And to a point that Mike kind of made, I totally agree on Dominic Lovett. I also believe that Ra Thomas, there's a lot to like about him there as well. To me, about bringing in 2 transfer players who already answer the most important question you have about a guy is, can he handle the action in the SEC? In the case of Thomas and Lovett, we know the answer to that question is yes. They've already proven that. So I do think that's something else to soften the blow here. And it kind of sucks to lose, Mitchell. I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't. But another element that softens that blow is the fact that you've already brought in 2 receivers that have already done battle and succeeded in the SEC, and that does mean something too.
And I'm gonna go here. Dominic Lovett, Rod Thomas, big names. We've talked about Ladd McConkey. Don't forget about Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. This is a guy that made some big catches over the course of the season in big situations, had the touchdown catch against Tennessee, had a big third down conversion in the game against Ohio State. I think he's a guy that can step in on the outside. Obviously, he's an incredible blocker, and I do think that is something that's still very much valued in this Georgia offense, especially if Kendall Milton is healthy next year and we get to see a full season from him. I think his explosiveness in the running game is going to be something where Rosemy-Jacksaint's downfield blocking is definitely going to be valued there. I think this is a guy who, he's pretty clearly one of your top wide receiver options. Had a nice year this year. I think made some really impressive strides over the course of the year. And is a guy who, again, availability, since he had that horrific leg injury his freshman year against Florida, has been one of the more consistent players and also a very consistent leader in that wide receiver room for Georgia. And I think he's going to play a very key role in this wide receiver room going forward for Georgia. There's still, despite losing A.D. Mitchell, there's still a lot to really like about what Georgia has in this wide receiver room. So resetting things here a bit, A.D. Mitchell enters the transfer portal. There's been a lot of rumors that Texas is a possibility for him. I'd maybe also keep an eye here on LSU, given Cortez Hankton, his former wide receiver coach at the University of Georgia, and that is a little bit closer to Texas as well there. Mike, I will give you first final words, final thoughts here on A.D. Mitchell's departure, what it says about the sport of college football, what it means for Georgia going forward. You can take it wherever you want to.
Well, I guess if he goes to Texas, maybe they'll score more than 7 points against TCU next year because that's all they scored this year. So I don't know. I mean, obviously he's got his national championship rings from Georgia. And, if he leaves, then that means there's an opportunity there or a reason that's greater than going for 3-23. And that's for everybody to decide for themselves. And listen, we've talked about it before. Georgia ain't a place for everybody. This place is hard. This is a difficult place for players to play. Just getting through practice week to week. If there was one storyline that Brandon and Connor and I heard over and over and over, it was Bloody Tuesday and how hard they worked and how games were easier. And it sounds so much fun to us, but those guys have to live it, right? And so I'm not going to fault anybody if they've got another opportunity. Again, this may not be football related. That's the one thing I'll say. And as for the tampering allegations, I think maybe they're fair, but who's to say that the player or the family didn't reach out to the school? I mean, those hands reach out both ways, and relationships are all over the place with now agents and NIL people involved. I mean, this is a whole new world. It's not as simple as a school calling somebody up. There's a recruiting factor to this. And just in the nick of time, we bring on our recruiting superstar. Thank goodness he's not in the portal. Jeff Santel. Jeff, we've been bouncing everything off the walls here. I know everybody's dying to hear your thoughts. You've been a guy that's been on top of Mitchell since Georgia signed him. How much trouble is this? And what was your instant reaction to this?
I would say it's more of a reaction over time, guys. I don't know. You hear things when you have your ear to the ground, and you don't even have to have your ear to the ground sometimes to learn that AD was thinking portal a while back. I don't know, middle of the season, late quadrant of the season. And you know what? I think just all I got to say is, he's done enough for Georgia. He's done great things for Georgia. I think what he wants to do now is he wants to get 50 catches. He wants to get like 900 yards and 10 touchdowns, and maybe he doesn't want to have to stop block as much. And you know what? He's earned the right in his vernacular in his career to do that. One thing you will notice is you watch who Georgia has added receiver asset-wise. You see Dominic Lovett, kind of an Isaiah McKenzie type guy, very electric space guy. You see Rod Thomas, a guy that can play all through the XYZ, lots of places on the line, up and down the line for Georgia. You see the speed they're bringing in. You see 10-3 guy in Anthony Evans the third. You see another 10-3 guy in Yazid Haynes. I mean, they're really going electric. It seems like the offense is being built for guys that can get themselves open and can stretch the field vertically. Right now, that's a skill set that I think lends itself to what Carson Beck can do right there. You think about Tyler Williams as well. Maybe one thing to think about here, guys, because you always think about what domino and which move leads to the next one. Let's say A.D. Mitchell goes to Texas. Well, Texas was a school that's really in the mix here for Deuce Robinson late. the talented tight end, rated as a tight end. I see him as a wide receiver, freelancer, back and forth a lot for whichever program he goes to. And I mean, I don't know, maybe the reaction from the audience is like, I don't know, vinegar or venom. I hope not, because this is a young man making a decision that's best for him. Guys, you got to remember, A.D. Mitchell's recruiting is different. He actually, if he would have had a bonkers year this year and been healthy, he would have been draft eligible. A lot of people forget that. He had reclassified from the 2019, his senior year. He reclassified from a 2020 to a 2021 recruit just so he could spend one fall really working hard on his game, getting stronger, getting faster, working on his route tree. So he is already a guy that is 3 years outside of his high school senior year.
BA, any final thoughts here on A.D. Mitchell and what comes next?
Yeah, I think the new age we live in has kind of redefined what it means to be a rival. You know, Georgia's traditional rivals, the teams that it plays every year, but moving forward, it's the teams that are actually trying to take food off your table that might be your real rivals. And Georgia doesn't play Texas very much. Texas, frankly, not good enough to play Georgia. They don't qualify to play Georgia. But in the future, if that's indeed where Mitchell ends up going, but in the future, these are going to be the kind of real rivalries, those programs that would try to reach and take something from you. And, you know, Georgia will one day maybe get its chance to get some retribution from the field, assuming that Texas can figure out a way to string some wins together.
BA, I do have to ask as the Georgia fan here, and again, I don't want to give you this much power, but, and I hate that I'm even asking this. I do find it kind of funny, though. Is A.D. Mitchell a DGD?
Yes, he is. He is. Full stop.
Okay,
I don't like the way that he leaves. I don't blame him for it. I blame more the era in which we live in.
Yeah, I think
but full stop, DGD.
I think I'm inclined to agree there. You look at the plays that he made. Again, gutted out, wanted to be out there in the college football playoff against LSU, played a big role in that game there as well. I just sort of think, you know, BA and Mike have both hit it on the head. This is just the era in which we live now. You're going to see guys come through Georgia, play early, develop, and then, you know, obviously they're going to win and then decide that they're going to want to go play elsewhere. I do say, and I'm going to have a story probably at some point next week on this, as obviously, you know, we're still dealing with the tragedy and the terrible loss of Devin Willock and Chandler LaCroix. What Georgia is trying to do this season is unprecedented. And, you know, Kirby Smart, in an interview with Reese Davis, he brought up Michael Jordan, and there's a Michael Jordan quote. If you have not seen The Last Dance, I would encourage you to go watch it. It is Jordan propaganda, but it is quite entertaining nonetheless. I do think that, you know, winning the way that Georgia has had to do it is hard, and it's not for everyone. And look, if you don't want to do it, that's okay. And that's fine. You can go try and win another way, but Georgia has shown what it takes to win and how to go about doing it. And it's not easy. And you can't exactly be a nice guy doing it. You can't exactly get the numbers that you want. You're going to have to make some sacrifices, both physically and personally. And that's not for everyone. And there's nothing wrong with asking out. You know, Horace Grant won 3 titles in that first three-peat, and then he wanted to go get his numbers and did so with the Orlando Magic. Now, he never won another title, but it happened at that Bulls level, and you're seeing it happen at the Georgia level here. There are still a lot of guys invested in three-peating, and that is something that you've already heard this team discuss a lot more going forward, and I think you're going to see it happen more as we get into the season, far more than you ever did the talk about potentially repeating this past season. So for Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, Brennan Adams, Jeff Sintel, A.D. Mitchell enters the transfer portal. We will keep you updated on where he goes. This is technically the last day that the transfer portal window is open, but don't think it's going anywhere as the May 1st through May 15th window. And as Brandon, who brought back a pillow from the national championship media room, points out, even without A.D. Mitchell, Georgia is still national champion. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll keep you guys updated when any news breaks, anything comes up. Stay tuned to DawgNation as well. Plenty more from the fallout from A.D. Mitchell's transfer decision. But A.D. Mitchell entering the transfer portal. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And as a reminder, Georgia is still the national champion.